Day 1318 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 1,113,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 970 in the past day. Then as for hardware, 1 tank, 1 APV, 13 artillery, and another strike on an oil refinery, all the way up in Orsk, which is where we start out on the map today, as Ukrainian Lutty drones struck the Orsk Neft oil refinery in Orenburg at least twice overnight, targeting the diesel hydrotreating unit, which is a key final stage facility upgrade from 2014, designed for deeper fuel purification. This refinery is located roughly 1,400 kilometers from Ukrainian lines, is mid-sized, and carries an annual capacity of about 6.6 million tons. The regional governor confirmed the strikes, yet asserted that full disruption of refinery operations has not occurred and that emergency crews are active at the site. Now, as it so happens, the Orsk refinery has never been subjected to UAV strikes in this war, underscoring Ukraine's continued push to extend its aerial combat range deeper into the nether regions of the Russian Federation. As for the hydrotreating unit, a worthy target, which is the final refining step before gasoline and diesel blend-in, which means disabling it can severely impair fuel quality and reduce usable output, where such disruptions would compound pressure on already strained networks in Russia's local fuel supply coming from Ukraine's drone campaign. Now, that alone is serious enough, but the unprecedented strike on a refinery this far from the front should jolt Moscow out of its denial phase. Simply put, it's another one for the refinery bingo card. So this latest reach demonstrated makes clear that Russia's rear is no longer a safe haven, and the implications for its fuel security are only beginning to sink in, depending on how far their denial can go. This incident was not an isolated event as it comes to the depth of Ukrainian reach, because also overnight, more long-range AFU drones struck Russia's Azot chemical plant in Berezniki within Perm Krai, a location that is more than 1,600 kilometers or 1,000 miles from the front lines, catapulting the strike 2 regions beyond Tartarstan into the northeast, making this one of the deepest penetration strikes to date, especially when you factor in the indirect flight paths the UAVs take to avoid air defense installations, thereby requiring an additional 20 to 30% range to cover, which equates to thereabouts 2,000 kilometers or 1,200 plus miles to reach this destination. And as for the facility, part of the Uralchem Group, one of Russia's largest fertilizer producers, that includes the production of urea and ammonium nitrate, compounds critical for agriculture but also essential for military ordnance. Local sources reported repeated blasts and fires across the complex overnight, with several drones hitting the industrial workshop. Russian state-linked channels floated alternate explanations, suggesting an accident in a refrigeration unit, but images of rising smoke and multiple impacts make such an explanation especially unlikely. It's also where the Ukrainian-linked unit, the 14th Regiment, claimed responsibility, calling the strike a new range record for its own set of long-distance UAV operations. So both of these overnight strikes puts Russia in a new unpredictable phase of the war as the AFU's aerial operations reach deeper and deeper into Russia's industrial heartland, extending the refinery roulette pattern further afield into the chemical sector. Now to the main map and into the east, with the sight of Russian trucks that burned at a fuel station in Luhansk overnight, as multiple military vehicles were seen on fire. The incident occurred at a commercial gas station along the main supply route, highlighting the vulnerability of Russia's support chains deeper inside the occupied territory. Truck convoys always remain the lifeline for fuel and ammunition in eastern Ukraine, given the limited throughput of rail spurs into Luhansk. So this is just some of the capability that Ukraine had long desired, taking aim in the occupied rear. Then to head further down the map, where gains by the Russian forces remain to be largely found in the Velika Novosilka axis. This time, a movement was seen just southeast of the settlement of Verbova, and then further down the map, but not strictly related to any settlement by name, but closest to Novovanivka. Meanwhile, Russia has struggled to translate mass assaults into durable advances around Pokrovsk and beyond, with the current update showing that the AFU is systematically clearing out the Russian forces on the old Bunny Ears portion of the map in the Dograpilla sector. In fact, more broadly, September's overall Russian gains were half those of August, making their weakest results since May. And ironically, happening at a time where we should be seeing some of their strongest results outplay. But even with, for example, 79 clashes reported in a single day on the Pokrovsk front, it shows that the tempo points more to attritional theater rather than genuine breakthrough. Strategically, Kyiv's localized counterattacks complicate Moscow's attempts to encircle the Pokrovsk-Myrnorad hub, which is a node that protects wider swaths of the Donetsk Oblast, leading to this type of pressure that forces Russia to commit reserves already strained in other sectors of the map. Even still, Russia is pouring roughly a division of Marines into the Dograpilla front, shifting units eastward, without evidence of territorial gains, with the build-up including naval infantry redeployed from secondary sectors, part of a broader rotation that has not translated into any discernible advances along this salient, but leading to its ongoing fair share of missing personnel notices on Russian telegram channels. So the pattern highlights a familiar imbalance. Russia can surge manpower into a contested area, but without accompanying armor and supply depth, the operation can become quite limited. Then to head far, far north on the map, and realistically just about as far north as you can go before the country border. For this following case, best to zoom right in here, where it's a location that invading forces hold a landing site north of Andrivka on this Sumy front. But for 3 days, FPV operators of the 225th Pentagon Unit have been destroying Russian boat reserves inbound, coming from Russia's oh-so-heavily embattled 810th Marine Brigade from across the border. And as you'll see here, the crossing of the river could hardly be more dangerous in the age of drone warfare. Almost literal sitting ducks. These invader river crossings in small inflatables, powered by paddles, are extremely slow, exposed, confined to predictable movements, and are intrinsically vulnerable targets to inbound FPVs. It was just a few days ago I brought up a telegram note coming from one of the invading 810th Marines in this sector, where the unit was ordered by command to conduct direct river crossings rather than overland flanking approaches that the troops themselves had favored. But as per local command, who I sometimes imagine yelling and verbally threatening their troops, imposed a shallow draft inflatable transit, funneling movement onto a single axis, denying the option for the dispersed land maneuver or phased security, which shamefully removes initiative at the squad level, leaving formations overly exposed, in a risky account of live or die trying approach. A theme that, in a nutshell, could describe many components of the Russian army. Next up, and in follow-up to the recent news about the Chernobyl nuclear power plant's temporary power disconnection, Russia itself has now released a video putting on display its own strikes against the related electrical substation that feeds power to the plant, that led to 3 hours of power outages, and also temporarily disconnecting some 307,000 users in the adjacent Chernihiv region during the strike in the same window. As for the meltdown disaster of Chernobyl's Reactor 4 in 1986, since then there has never been an option to simply barrel up the spent fuel and bury it deep underground, because this type of high-level nuclear fuel remains intensely hot and dangerously radioactive for decades. Well, hot for decades, radioactive for centuries, thereby requiring the electrical grid for cooling and monitoring for those decades to come. Ultimately, where this power outage is concerned for yesterday, with Russia parading around footage of targeting the Chernobyl-linked substation, one has to wonder if Russian military intelligence either knows what they are doing, or doesn't know what they're doing. It's hard to say what's worse. But in the least, it's been nearly 4 decades since the nuclear power plant meltdown, which now only needs to rely on passive cooling and monitoring to keep the site under control. And as it so happens, following this incident, Putin said during a conference that Kyiv should remember there are nuclear plants on Ukrainian territory and Russia can respond accordingly. Not exactly a comment any leader should be saying internationally, but also one that sounds a little defensive, as if Putin has his own concerns from Ukraine striking Russian nuclear facilities, something he'd not considered before. It's not an action that Ukraine will perform, but food for thought for Putin considering to pack up this SMO. Then to move to the news and into the Kremlin news, as President Putin used the annual Valdai forum in Sochi to mock Europe's drone concerns, and dismiss NATO as a paper tiger, and warn that US missile deliveries to Ukraine would escalate tensions. He denied Russia was behind recent UAV flights over Denmark, Germany, Poland, Norway, and other countries, comparing these sightings to UFO reports before jokingly saying, "I won't do it anymore," quote unquote. Putin had also claimed no Russian troops were near the Finnish border, but threatened to station forces there if conditions escalated and in response to a NATO enlargement. Though it's statements like these that, of course, contradict Putin's own previous remarks of having already moved soldiers near the Finnish border, so this Kremlin-style rhetoric becomes quite transparent over time. For example, beyond statements of tomahawks representing a new level of escalation or remarks of moving troops to the Finnish border, it should hopefully remind most of the Abrams tanks, the Storm Shadows, the F-16 fighter jets, and other weapons platforms that the Kremlin always suggests will reach profound new levels of escalation. And then during the Valdai conference, Putin had also stated that Russia is still advancing in the SMO while facing the entire NATO bloc, quote unquote, which is a confusing statement to be made, especially as every first or second fortnight the Kremlin comes out to say that any change to a direct NATO involvement would represent an entirely new level of escalation. But in this latest Putin telling, Russia is already directly at war with NATO. So ultimately, Putin's Valdai intervention combined tactical messaging with broad strategic signaling, with citing German rearmament and threatening deployment near Finland. He sought to frame NATO's moves as justification for further Russian escalation. It's always damned if you do or damned if you don't when it comes to the Kremlin. But despite all of this bluster, Putin managed to call NATO a paper tiger whilst simultaneously, practically within the same breath, calling it an escalating threat. Always lacking any sort of consistent approach to pretty much anything that he says. And then to finally close the session insisting, quote, Russia has always been, is, and will be, end quote. Even though the current existing Russian Federation that was formalized under a constitution about 34 years ago happens to make Russia younger than a Game Boy, or a Baywatch, or a millennial. Then to a final quick funny to round off the video, with Russia's MKRU news outlet publishing a story on the topic of Russia who might commence developing new hypersonic weapons. Sort of a maybe, maybe not, but the focus here isn't the thinly veiled international threat of new arms development, but rather what we might refer to as the AI slop imagery used in the article, as the outlet used an AI image generator to create a hypersonic missile, which had output a cross between a missile and the tail of a jet, with the oversight of a disproportionately sized truck underneath, sitting on a road that leads to nowhere on both sides. Even the truck somehow looks fictitious. along with the rest of the missile, which appears to be equipped with another side-mounted missile, which, if you look even closer, turns into an even smaller set of missiles that face the other direction. That's some high-tech wizardry right there. Just about everything is wrong with this picture. Now, mistakes can happen, sure. But perhaps the even bigger blunder here is that I've seen this Russian media outlet use this very same image on past articles. About a year ago. Gee, I guess some things just can't be fixed. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment, subscribe, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!